Hello everyone, I'm Heather. Thanks for joining me for today's video, in which I'm going to give you some tips on how not to travel with a baby. A couple of years ago, I made a video about how to cruise with a baby, and it kind of ended up actually being about cruising with kids of all ages. But in today's video, I'm going to focus more on what you should not do when you travel with a baby. The idea for this video came from a brief incident that we experienced at Boston Logan International Airport when we flew there to visit my son Andrew back in May. Neither Megan nor I can remember if this was when we arrived in Boston on our flight and we're getting on the bus. You have to take the Blue Line bus to go to the rental car center to pick up our rental car, or if it was when we returned our rental car at the rental car center and we were getting on the bus to go back to the terminal to get our flight home to Minneapolis. We can't remember when it was because both of those times it was dark. Because one, it was like 9 o'clock at night, and the other one, it was like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. So it was one of those two times. But either way, we were getting on the Blue Line bus at Boston Logan International Airport. We were a traveling party of 5. It was me, my daughter Megan, my son Ben, and my parents, who my mom especially needed extra assistance because she has bad knees. And we each had a suitcase and a carry-on, but the kids and I, our carry-on is always a backpack, so we had the backpacks on our backs. So we were had just gotten off our plane and were getting on the bus to go to the rental car center, or we had just returned our rental car and we were getting on the bus to go to the terminal to get on our plane back home. I can't remember which. It doesn't matter. We encountered this couple that, I hate to say it, they were a very nice looking little family, but they were doing a lot of things wrong. And that prompted me to make this video, because new parents especially, this would be helpful to, because if you've never traveled with your baby before, especially if it involves a flight, and that's what I'm going to be focusing on today, you're going to want to hear these tips because this will really make a difference for you. Okay, so what happened was the bus that comes around the terminal on the Blue Line at the airport in Boston, it's an extended bus, with one of those accordion style connector things in the middle. So it's long, and it has a front door and a back door, and you can board at either door and you can get off at either door. And there is a rack for luggage in the front half, and there's a rack for luggage in the back half. And the entire first part of the bus, where the driver is all on one level with some seats. Not very many though, because the rack is there taking up a lot of the space. And then the back part of the bus, the first part where the door has some seats and the rack, but then there's some steps up and there's more seats elevated at the back of the bus, because that's, I suppose, where the engine is and the back tires and everything. Anytime you're riding a very full bus in any situation, you should always move in as far as you can. Fill up all the seats first, and then if it ends up being standing room only, people should only be standing if there's no seats left. And you shouldn't be refusing to move into the bus so that people can't, continue to get on or get out or whatever. We all boarded at the front door of the bus. We stowed all of our luggage into the luggage rack. My parents, someone got up to offer them their seats in the front of the bus because they were elderly and, needed seats. And so someone nice had gotten up so that they could sit down. But there was no other place to sit in the whole first 2/3 of the bus. But there were a whole bunch of open seats at that back elevated part of the bus. And so the kids and I were very quickly moving our way back there to sit down and get out of the way of other people that were still trying to get on and stow their luggage and everything. As we were moving past to get to those seats and get out of the way so that more people could fit in the bus, this couple with a very large fancy stroller with the baby in it and a whole bunch of luggage. They had 3, 4, 5 suitcases. I don't know, a lot of suitcases. And the dad was up there, a younger man up there trying to get the suitcases in. They obviously intended to bring the entire open stroller with the baby in it up onto the bus. And they were getting mad at people, including us. And the young woman, the mom, actually snapped at me and kind of scolded me. She's like, don't you see that we're trying to get on the bus? And I said, yes, I do see that. That's why we're trying to get out of your way. But they were doing several things wrong. And that's what I wanted to talk to you about in this video today. Okay, so they were making the situation more difficult for themselves in several ways. First of all, anybody who's taken a baby in a stroller on a bus before knows you cannot take the baby in the open stroller, the whole thing, onto the bus. There's no room for that. You can't have a stroller open on the bus. The baby has to be out of the stroller. You have to be holding the baby, and the stroller must be folded up. If you've been to Disney World, you know how this is. They make you fold up your stroller. You can't have an open stroller on the bus. There's no room for that in the aisle. It's going to block people, and it's a safety hazard because then people can't get through the aisle because your stroller's in the way in case, there was an emergency and they had to all get off the bus quickly or whatever. People can't move around if there's an open stroller sitting there. So you cannot take a stroller open with a baby sitting in it onto a bus. So that was their first mistake. They needed to have the baby out of the stroller, and the stroller needed to be folded up. The second mistake along with that is that the stroller was massive. This was one of those big, fancy, super duper nice strollers, the best of, on the market. And when I saw that thing, I'm like, that is not the stroller that you take with you when you are traveling. And I'll tell you more about that in a little bit. And then their third mistake was that they had way too much luggage. Okay, so I'm going to tackle these one at a time and give you some additional tips too. This family had either just gotten to Boston on a plane and they were going on the bus to pick up their rental car, or possibly going to get off at the stop that lets you get onto the subway system in Boston. And if that's what they were doing, oh boy, I don't know how they would possibly have managed that with that stroller and all that luggage. So I hope they were going to pick up a rental car. Or they had just returned their rental car and they were getting back on the bus to go take a flight and go home like we were. I don't know which situation it was, but either way, a flight and a rental car was probably involved in whatever their travel was. Don't take your big fancy stroller that you use at home, that you keep in the back of your SUV or in the trunk of your car or the back of your minivan. Don't take that with you traveling. You don't need it. You don't need the big fancy stroller. Even if you're taking a road trip, honestly, you wouldn't want to be taking that big, huge, fancy stroller with you on a road trip, because then you're going to have no room in the trunk of your car for your luggage. So you need to downsize your stroller when you travel with a baby. You need to have, ideally, an umbrella stroller. Now, they do make umbrella strollers, so they fold up, so they're basically just a stick when they fold up. Really small. They do make those with a little basket underneath, so when it unfolds, it still does have a basket underneath. That's what I had. I bought it at a Walmart on the way to the airport one time when we were leaving on a trip when my oldest son Andrew was very little, and I realized I had forgotten my stroller at home. I had another little travel stroller at home, but I had forgotten to bring it with us because I think in the process of switching things out to take the luggage, I didn't put the stroller back in the car. So we stopped and bought that, and I used that thing for all three of my kids. So if you're only using it when you travel, even though it might be a pretty cheap stroller and not real, fancy or anything with great features, if you're only using it when you travel, it's still going to last a long time. Mine did. It had a little roof and it had a little basket underneath. So it still provided shade for the baby and it still provided a place for me to stick stuff. And that's all you really need. The other possibility is if you're going to like a theme park or something where they rent strollers, is you may not even want to bring a stroller. You may want to just rent a stroller like you can at Disney World. The only thing that I'll say about that though, is that the strollers that they rent at the theme parks and stuff are not very comfortable for the kids. They don't have any padding. They're made out of hard plastic. So they're great in a pinch if you don't want your kids to have tired feet and be all wiped out at the end of the day, or they can't keep up with you walking. But it is kind of nice to have a little more comfortable stroller for them when you're at a place like that. So that would be my first piece of advice for that young family, is they needed to downgrade their stroller and have something much, much smaller and something that could be folded up very quickly, ideally with one hand. There were times when I was a single mom, when I had Andrew before I got married, that I was traveling with Andrew by myself and I had to be holding him and be able to fold up my stroller and carry it with one hand, and I could. So you have to be like that. You have to be prepared that you have to do this by yourself and nobody's going to help you. The second thing about that was the getting on the bus. They obviously did not know what I said, that when you ride on a bus or really any other, you can't push your stroller up the aisle of the airplane. You can't push your stroller up the aisle of a train. You really shouldn't. I mean, I have seen people push an entire stroller onto a subway, but even that is not a great idea. If it's not busy and there's lots of space, it's fine. But really, you should be folding up your stroller in that situation too and holding your child. Now, if your baby is pretty little, that's where I would recommend you could actually have them in a sling or a front carrier or a back carrier and then fold up the stroller. So then you still have them attached to you and you don't have to worry about like them slipping out of your arms or whatever. That can be really handy. Ideally, if you can have something that's easy to unbuckle quick or unstrap quick, and then you can just keep it on them really quick if you have to set them back in the stroller, buckle them into the stroller. Otherwise, just be prepared. You've got to pick up your child and hold your child and be able to fold up that stroller to get on transportation. Given that, I want to talk specifically about traveling with a baby on an airplane. And I know right now I'm going to get comments from people who are going to disagree about this, but I'm going to tell you what I always did, what the airlines recommend and want you to do, and it's not just because of money, it's because of safety. If you have your child in a stroller at the airport, which is a good idea, you should have your child in the stroller at the airport so you don't have to carry your baby all the way through the airport. Okay, so that's what we always did. Again, it needs to be a small, compact, easy to fold up stroller. You can push your baby in the stroller all the way to the door of the airplane. And then similar to a gate-checked piece of luggage, they will gate check your stroller for you. One of the airport crew will come up the stairs and take your stroller and put it in the belly of the plane. And then they will bring it back up when the plane lands at your destination and open it for you, and it'll be sitting right there for you open. When you get off the plane, it'll be there on the jetway waiting for you, and you can carry your baby off the plane and stick them in the stroller and push them away on the other end. That's what I always did. That's what you want to do. You want to gate check your stroller. On the plane, your baby needs a ticket. There's no way around it. Yes, I know that you are allowed to hold a child under 2 in your lap on a plane. I would never do that. It's not safe to do that. If you've seen any of the recent stories about turbulence and the people that have been injured, and one man was even recently killed because of turbulence, turbulence is going to continue to get worse because of climate change. And that's just the way it is. But even back in the 90s, in the mid 90s, when I traveled with my son Andrew when he was a baby, I always bought him a seat. You should be buying your baby a seat. Your child is going to need their own seat from ages 2 to forever anyway. So you've had this child, get used to it now. Please buy them a ticket. Buy them a ticket and put them in their own seat in an FAA approved car seat. That's what you should be doing. My kids have always had their own seats on airplanes ever since they were infants. Megan was the youngest. Megan flew at 5 months old, and she had her own seat, and she was in her car seat, in her own seat on the airplane. That's what the airlines want you to do. If the flight attendant seems annoyed with you because you don't have that happening, it's because they're worried about the safety of your baby. Because they know that you holding your baby in your arms, and I made another video about this too, is not safe for you or for your baby. So I very strongly recommend, if you are traveling with your baby and you're going on an airplane, you buy your baby their own ticket, you put them in the car seat in their own seat. buckled in. And if you need help with that, the flight attendants are happy to help you get that buckled into the seat. What they're not happy to do is to argue with the people that say, but I have my baby in a sling and I have my baby in a front carrier. Isn't my baby safer if they're attached to me in a front carrier in a sling? No, they're not. Yes, you can carry your baby onto and off the airplane in the front carrier or the sling, but you cannot have your baby in a front carrier or a sling on an airplane during flight, especially during takeoff and landing. Depending on the airline, they'll either say you can't have the baby in there at all during the entire flight, or they'll say that you at least have to have them out of there during takeoff and landing. And you're thinking to yourself, well, my baby isn't safer in my arms. My arms can't hold it as well as the sling. You're right. That's why the baby needs to be in a car seat in its own seat. A baby in a front carrier or a baby in a sling on an airplane is basically an airbag for the passenger that's holding them. That's a horrible thought, I know, but that's what it is. That's why you don't want them there. Don't be that person who comes on with just a sling or a front carrier and then insists to the flight attendant, they're going to kick you off the plane if you make a fuss. You've got to take that baby out of there. If you want your baby to be safe when you're flying, your baby needs to be in a car seat in their own seat. If you're going to be renting a car when you go on your trip anyway, bonus, now you've already got the car seat with you. You can rent a car seat when you rent a car, but you shouldn't have to. If you're flying there, you should be bringing your baby's car seat with you anyway. I will also add, I noticed that young family that we encountered on the bus did not have a car seat with them. So that means not only were they taking their baby on a plane, they were going to be holding their baby on the plane, which I don't recommend. Also, it's uncomfortable. Who wants to sit holding a baby the whole time you're on the flight? I sure don't. The last thing that really struck me about that young family is that they had so much luggage. They had like 4 really big size suitcases. I mean, they probably had as much luggage as we had, and we were 5 adult people. Here's the thing. I know that kids need a lot of stuff sometimes. Babies need a lot of stuff. I breastfed all of my kids. Breastfeeding is fantastic. If you choose to breastfeed and if you can breastfeed, it makes travel with your baby so much easier before they're on solid foods, because you are their food and drink and you can just do it anywhere. And it's totally free and doesn't cost you anything. You don't have to worry about feeding your baby or mixing formula or messing with bottles or any of that. It's great. But I totally understand that there are many, many moms out there or families who cannot or choose not to breastfeed for whatever reason, and that's totally fine. What I would recommend in that situation, if you need to be bringing feeding paraphernalia for your baby, whether that be cans of formula or bottles for formula or for pumped breast milk maybe, or jars of baby food and little plates and stuff like that, that's totally fine. Here's a couple things about that. Number 1, you can take all of that through security. It's fine. They are not going to separate your baby from their milk. They're not going to separate the baby from formula. They might ask to test it, but in most cases, you're going to get through security fine with your baby with their formula or breast milk. I would keep that stuff separate in a separate bag just for baby, for feeding stuff. And that can be your baby who you bought a ticket for and has their own seat on the plane. That's their carry-on. A nice carry-on bag. I'm sure there's some great ones out there. If anybody's got a recommendation, put it in the comments. That can have, be combo diaper bag and then also have their feeding stuff in it. Maybe you got separate sides or something. That's great. That can be baby's carry-on, and baby is entitled to a carry-on because baby has their own ticket. And then you can reserve their suitcase. And yes, baby should have a suitcase. Baby is their own person. They're entitled to a suitcase too, whether it be a carry-on you put in the overhead compartment or a bigger suitcase, maybe you're on a longer trip. But keep in mind, baby clothes are small. Baby clothes are very small. You don't need a whole suitcase for baby's clothes because baby's clothes are 1/4 the size of yours, okay? Even if you have to bring an extra outfit for baby every day because they spit up or have a poopy accident or whatever, you still have very small clothes to deal with. So half the suitcase for baby can be their clothes and the other half can be for diapers. But you shouldn't need any more than that. So if you're bringing 1 suitcase and 1 carry-on, there's no reason that baby should need anything more than 1 suitcase and 1 carry-on. Let me back up a little bit for going through security with a baby. They're not going to separate you from your baby at security, but again, the baby has to come out of the stroller. You cannot push your baby through the metal detector or a body scanner in a stroller. You have to take them out of the stroller. You have to fold the stroller up. The stroller has to go through the X-ray machine, and you have to go through the metal detector with your baby. The last thing I want to talk about in this video is I want to talk about just some safety stuff when you're traveling with babies, especially if your baby is starting to get mobile. Either they're cruising along the furniture, or they're starting to crawl, or maybe they can even walk. When you go to a destination and you're staying in a hotel or a campsite or an Airbnb or whatever it is, you're taking new forms of transportation that they're not familiar with. And I guess what I would specifically say here is your child is too young for you to talk to them and prepare them ahead of time. That's a big thing for me with older kids. You really need to prepare your children ahead of time for what to expect so that they know how to behave. But when your child is still a baby or even a toddler, they can't understand when you tell them this is what it's going to be like and we have to make sure we do this. So you need to kind of anticipate that ahead of time and be prepared to keep them safe in any situation. And what I mean by that is, for example, and I'm going on some horrible past travel stories. If you are holding your baby, be careful, okay? For two things. Number one, where you step and where you walk. One time, this is from my own personal experience, my dad and I and my baby son Andrew, who was 3 months old at the time and very tiny, because he was premature, we drove to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. So we didn't take a plane or anything like that, but we drove there. And we were at our hotel and went out to go swimming in the pool. And my dad was holding my son, in his arms, and slipped on a wet spot in the pool and fell. Now he, managed to sacrifice his own body and keep Andrew safe, but it really scared us because obviously you don't want to fall when you're holding a baby. So you really want to watch your step when you're holding your child, if you're going down steps, if you're on uneven surfaces, if it's slippery, anything like that. So be really careful of that. And then the other thing is if you drop the baby, like we had that very unfortunate story a number of years ago where the grandfather dropped the baby girl off the side of the cruise ship. That was just really, really sad. You have to be very careful. Don't lean over a balcony with a baby. Don't, look at the pretty view and hold him out the window. Don't be like Michael Jackson with his baby son blanket holding him off the balcony in Paris, wherever that was. Okay, don't do that. Don't drop your baby from a height or at all. And then once they're starting to get a little bit mobile and they're cruising around or they're crawling around, you really want to be conscious of safety hazards wherever you're staying that you would have more control over at home. So things like small objects that they could choke on, sharp corners that they could bonk themselves on and cut themselves, electrical outlets. A lot of hotels are really good about that. At Disney, they do cover the electrical outlets so that kids can't, stick things in them and stuff like that. But you just really want to be conscious of things like that when you're traveling with an infant, that you're checking the environment over when you first get to a place and looking for things like that that might not be safe. I mean, I've done things just like, I'll move a coffee table right out of the room and stuff like that if it's got pokey corners and things like that so that they're not in danger of hurting themselves if they're just starting to pull up and walk around and things. I hope this video was helpful to you. I'm pretty stern on this topic because I definitely put a lot of thought and care into traveling with my children when they were babies, and I just really feel very strongly that as a parent, it's your responsibility to keep your children safe, whether that's at home or when you're traveling. And this is an area that I'm not willing personally to compromise on. I would never compromise my children's safety when we travel. So I hope that this gives you some good tips and suggestions that you can use if you're traveling with a baby. Maybe you have a vacation, your first vacation coming up with your new baby. It's very exciting. But you also maybe don't think about all these things ahead of time. So I hope that this provided you with some useful information and some helpful tips that you'll be able to use. If it did, you found value in this video or you liked it at all, I would really encourage you to give me a thumbs up down below. And if you want to make sure that you don't miss any of my upcoming videos about all aspects of the travel experience, make sure that you're subscribed to the channel. Have a great day, everyone, and safe travels.